Hey, everybody. I'm really excited because this man to my, well, technically my right or your left, depending on how you look at it, uh, is someone that I've always wanted to meet. We were supposed to have dinner one day in Vegas, and we've talked since, I guess what, since 2016, Guy, something like that. Yeah, easily. But this is the first time we actually have met in this way, or in a way where, you know, we're face to face, so to speak. Guy Hobbs is the managing director of Hobbs and Ong and Associates, and I'm going to start off appropriately by reading his bio. Uh, he founded Hobbs, Ong and Associates in 1996 and serves as president and managing director with more than 40 years of experience, which includes financial advisory services, tax policy and administration, budget and capital planning strategies, economic and fiscal analysis, debt management, sports entertainment project support, and operations research. He also has significant experience working with the state legislature and multiple units of regional and local government. Mr. Hobbs has been actively involved as a technical resource to the Nevada legislature for nearly 4 decades. He served on the Legislative Commission's subcommittee to study laws regulating to financing of infrastructure, which accompany development. The subcommittee studying laws relating to the distribution among local governments of revenue from state and local taxes. And in 2002, Mr. Hobbs was appointed by Governor Kenny Soon, again, to chair the governor's task force on tax policy in Nevada. In 2019, Mr. Hobbs was appointed to the Commission on School Funding, established by SB 543 of the 2019 legislative session, and serves as vice chairman. Mr. Hobbs' background also includes several years of teaching experience on behalf of the College of Business and Economics at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and 13 years as Chief Financial Officer for Clark County. Mr. Hobbs earned a BA in Business Economics from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and an MBA from UNLV. And lest I miss my protocol, which I don't do, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Guy, your business partner, Catherine Ong Sisolak, who is the director, who's also co-founder of Hobbs Ong Associates. She was also the former First Lady of Nevada, and it includes her area of expertise includes financial advisory services, assisting municipal insurers in obtaining more than 24 billion in tax-exempt financing through a variety of security instruments, including revenue bonds, general obligation bonds, commercial paper, and assessment districts, among others. She also has experience in the preparation and administration of government budgets, fiscal impact analysis, legislative strategy, private activity bond administration, and feasibility studies. Mrs. Sisolak has provided oversight on the sale of more than 350 bond transactions totaling 35.4 billion of taxable and tax-exempt debt. The proceeds funded improvements for airports, convention facilities, flood and water and sewer projects, hospitals, special improvement districts, transportation, and general government projects. These issues have included general obligation, revenue and special improvement district bonds, refundings and general obligation with additionally secured revenues. Ms. Sisolak received a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, with an emphasis in finance. And to that, Guy, I welcome you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Zenny. Unfortunately, my partner, Catherine, isn't with us today, but I'm sure that she'll appreciate you covering her background and experience. Kathy, I hired as an intern, I want to say 42 years ago, and she and I worked together at Clark County when I was the chief financial officer. She also served as the director of budget and financial planning for the county. And when we went into private practice, 27 or so years ago, Kathy and I decided to make this a core venture, focusing on infrastructure in the state. And, you know, one of the things that I think is safe to say is Las Vegas has been an exceptionally interesting community to be a part of over the past 4 decades, given the type of growth and the maturation of the economy here. And we feel very fortunate to have been a part of all of that.
Yeah, a lot of people don't seem to understand bond issues. So I want to first congratulate you, first of all, on your work regarding what will be the Oakland Athletics stadium financing and its successful passage through the legislature. And of course, Allegiant Stadium, which has done phenomenally well as the new home of the Raiders and really a new cultural home for Las Vegas. But how did you, first of all, before we get to that, for those entrepreneurs in the room, how did you get started? How did you say, what was the aha moment where you said, I'm going to start my own company? And then how did, was that with Kathy? How did that all happen? That's an interesting story.
Yeah, it's one of those things I reflect on. When I first moved to Las Vegas, I believe it was 1977, and I came out here from California. And I thought, well, University of Nevada, Las Vegas is an up and coming place. It would be an interesting place to spend about 2 years working on my master's degree. And of course, that plan didn't work out very well as any because, here it is all of those years later, and I'm still here. But one of the things that, became very, very clear to me as I became more integrated in the town and working at the university, which you were kind enough to mention in the bio part of this. I stayed attached to UNLV for several years as part of the Center for Business and Economic Research. So, aside from getting to know Vegas as most people picture Las Vegas, we were working on the data side of Las Vegas as well, trying to document the growth and the evolution of the economy, trying to better understand what the future prospects of this community might be. And of course, with something that was changing as rapidly as Las Vegas was, you get kind of hooked on all of that. And you see opportunities to make improvements in the way that we gather data, the way that we tried to diversify our economy. And we can talk about that as a part of this, because I think that's one of the most interesting things about Las Vegas. When people think about economic diversification, most people's first reaction when you're talking about Las Vegas would be, wait a minute, you guys have always been sort of a hospitality, hotel, gaming, entertainment type of place, and you still are. So how have you really diversified over the past 40 years? And by being here, I can certainly attest to the fact that diversification can include moving between different kinds of industries and trying to build sort of a balanced economy. But it can also occur within the same areas where Las Vegas has proved to be so proficient over the years. Generally, that's entertainment, and for a great period of time, the casino gambling part of it, as we all know, was a primary focus. And then, probably 30 years ago, it started moving into more of hotels like the Mirage began to appear. Different layers of hotels. And I remember at the time people saying, you guys have lost your minds. Nobody's going to pay $100 for a hotel room in Las Vegas. Those are all $39.95 with a free shrimp cocktail. And it sort of changed the paradigm of Vegas. From being a discount gambling type of destination to more of a full service entertainment and experiential kind of place. And what we've seen over the years is the emergence of retail as a primary reason for people coming to Las Vegas. Certainly entertainment, and then within entertainment, you have a number of different areas as well. You have entertainment like we're used to seeing in showrooms along the strip, but you also have the diversification into areas like sports, which is one of the reasons that you and I got to know each other several years ago. We had been planning for a new stadium facility for some number of years before the then Oakland Raiders entered the equation. And marrying those two concepts together really gave it inertia and gave Las Vegas ultimately Allegiant Stadium. And I know I'm venturing a little bit off your question, Zenny, but I think for a lot of people, this growth and maturity of Las Vegas as a entertainment community is an important facet, because I've watched that happen over the years. And frankly, getting back to the bond side of things, I've had to explain that to rating analysts and to the credit markets for nearly 40 years. And I remember going back to New York in the old days when you had to actually fly back to New York to meet with the rating analysts or to do road shows and those kinds of things. And talking to one analyst in particular who said, it's kind of interesting what you're saying about Las Vegas and your depiction of it being more of a sophisticated type of economy. All we really think about when we read an OS or a prospectus or something like that from Las Vegas is tumbleweeds, showgirls, and neon. Well, we're a little bit more than that. But that was like a real awakening in my head that we have a story to tell. And the better we tell that story, the better we're going to do when we go into the credit markets. So that's something that, I've kind of circled around your question a little bit, but the growth of this community, I think, particularly over the past 3 or 4 decades. When I moved here in 1977, I want to say there were 325,000 people here.
Wow.
And it was a very, very different feeling place than it is today, because there are 2 million more than that, more than 2 million more than that are now living here. That's pretty rapid growth for a very small community. And because of that, we needed a lot of infrastructure. Water is an issue out here in the desert. Roadways, it's important that the lifeblood of the economy here, tourism, that it's easy for them to get here, whether it's by air or by road or, well, those are the two primary ways that people get here. And so infrastructure became a huge issue, and we're still, working on that today. And one of those facets of infrastructure, aside from the normal municipal infrastructure that we think about, is community infrastructure. And that includes things like Allegiant Stadium and other things that support the base economy. So with that, I'll take a breath and let you sort of redirect me back to where you hoped.
No, that was good. That's actually better than I could do. I have to ask, having said all that, I'm going to work backward from the question that it's on everybody's mind. First of all, explain to them how the bond issue for the A's ballpark will work, for those who don't understand.
Sure, and I'll try to give you a broad overview of the overall funding. The project, as we understand it, is anticipated to be about a $1.5 billion project. Now, that doesn't include land, but of course, with the final destination of this project being on the Tropicana site, land is not an issue. 9 acres has been set aside by those who own and control the property at the Tropicana, and the rest of that 38-acre parcel will be redeveloped and be supportive of that development on that corner. So to fund all of that, the team, as we understand it, is putting in about $1 billion worth of funding into the $1.5 billion ballpark. The public will be putting about $350 million. The bill says $380 million, and it could vary between $350 and $380. As you well know, Zenny, the time at which we tried to nail down most of these numbers, interest rates were at a certain level and those sorts of things. And by the time we actually issue the bonds, which I'm guessing will be, 12 to 18 months from now, something like that. Interest rates could vary from where they are today. So it could be a little bit more, a little bit less. We've kind of fixed the revenue sources that would support this, but of that 350 million that comes from the public side, or 380 million that comes from the public side, about 180 million will come from transferable tax credits. That comes directly from the state of Nevada. And over time, there's an expectation that most of that, all but about 60 million, would be repaid from cash flows. So let me back up for a moment and get back to the bonding portion of this. That is really a piece that will be carried out by Clark County. And right now it's estimated that the total project proceeds from that bond issue would be about 120 million. Again, that's based on current interest rates and those sorts of things. So it could vary a bit from that. That bonding, any bond that you issue has to be supported by a source of repayment. And the source of repayment in this case is a little bit unique because we're used to seeing, and I'm sure you are in California as well, bond issues that are supported by property tax, those that commonly go on to your ballots down there for approval, or supported by specific taxes like sales tax or motor vehicle fuel tax. Those are pretty straightforward, and usually those carry what's referred to as a general obligation backing from the issuing entity. So if it was Alameda County and they were using some fuel tax for road projects, chances are they would put the full faith and credit of Alameda County behind that. That secures you a better rate, that gets you more proceeds, that gets you lower debt service payments. The credit quality is always extraordinarily important. Now, in this particular case, we've done something a little different. I know it's a topic that it's near and dear to your heart, but the area surrounding the stadium is going to be referred to as a special entertainment improvement district, an SEID, and that's a new thing here in Nevada. And essentially that's a dotted line drawn around the proposed stadium, and all of the tax revenues that are generated within that boundary will be put into a separate bucket and used to secure the bonds for this particular project. Now, what I just described to you is the essence of something, again, I know is near and dear to you because you've spent a lot of time working on it yourself over the years, but that's a tax increment financing.
Yep. Yeah.
So sales tax and employment related taxes and other forms of public revenue that are generated within those 9 acres will all be put into a separate account. That account will then be used to pay the principal and interest, much like a mortgage that people take out on their homes over a 30-year period. The revenue that comes into that will service that the bonds that are issued, or in an analogous way, the mortgage, if you will, the contractual obligation that we have as Clark County to repay that, and it'll also be backed by the full faith and credit of the county, which should get us preferential interest rates. So it's kind of a new twist. Tax increment has existed in a lot of forms, in a lot of places. It's very common for things like redevelopment, as I know that you've spent a lot of time with over your years in working with the public sector. That's generally just a property tax type of capture.
Yeah.
We have sales tax increment districts here in the state of Nevada that are tourism oriented. And essentially we decided to take that idea a step or two further with a special entertainment improvement district as we've created for this particular case. Now, to contrast that for a moment, because I know some of the folks that follow you are also interested in Allegiant Stadium, the now home of the Raiders. Done a little bit differently as a part of the legislation that approved. Now here in Nevada, we need legislation for nearly everything we do at the local level because we're far from what is referred to as a home rule state. So we had to seek legislation both in the case of the Raiders and the A's to do the kinds of financings that we're talking about here. And in the case of the Allegiant Stadium and the Raiders, a special additional room tax was levied, and that's what's being used to repay the bonds for, and that's on a countywide basis. And that's what's being used to repay the bonds on Allegiant Stadium. So quite different sources of security. With something like a room tax, we have a lengthy history with room tax here. We know how that performs over time. We know how it performs during recessions. We've recently learned how it performs during something like COVID, So we have a lot of information about that. With something like the Sports and Entertainment Improvement District, that's something where you don't have a lot of history, and it's largely based on projections that are done by experts in the field of sports, Legends, CSL, a number of others have looked at numbers that were used to generate the estimates that we were using to construct the financing for this. So hopefully in part of that answer, I've covered what you've hoped I would.
Oh yeah, that was more than perfect. I was going to get away some questions. I think some of these have been explained, but just these are lay people. So Hopers, who's a regular viewer, he says, "I assume that all these bonds are federal and tax exempt."
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a great question because the normal thinking is that anything that you issue from a municipal standpoint, in both of these cases, Allegiant and I suppose the yet to be named stadium where the A's will potentially be playing, since they're municipally backed, you assume that they're tax exempt. It's not quite that simple. And that's what makes this a great question because we had to spend a lot of time with tax counsel and bond counsel talking through the particulars of this. Both of these facilities will be publicly owned. That certainly helps in this. The use that goes on inside is private use, and that's one of the things that generates the questions. But to the questions that we have with bond and tax counsel, because private use and public use are two different things, and normally private use is taxable, public use is tax exempt. To make a super long and probably horrifyingly boring story shorter, our preliminary determination is that both of these will be issued on a tax exempt basis.
And our viewers are never bored by that. That's just FYI. And then he says, "Can you explain bonds so someone doesn't get what they are?" And I think what this person is looking for is it fair to say that a bond, just to simplify things, is a kind of loan?
That's absolutely what it is. A bond is essentially, if you hold a bond, you hold something that is a promise to pay on the part of those who you lend money to. So if you're the holder of a bond, you've been a part of a group that lent money to a borrower, and the bond is evidence of your portion of a promised repayment. So it's kind of like, again, using the mortgage example. Mortgages are simple because usually that's a bank or some other form of financial institution that originates those loans for a homeowner, and the mortgage is the contractual obligation to repay it. So if you try to make that analogy work, a bond is the contractual obligation for repayment of that obligation. It's evidence of a form of security. These are securities, so they're largely regulated. There's a tremendous amount of oversight that goes into the issuance of these. It's certainly not a trivial matter to issue bonds like this, but it's just another form of lending.
And yes, will these bonds be callable?
Another great question. I'm impressed with these questions, Zenny.
That's the smart viewers.
Yeah, no, I like it. I like it. Pretty typically these days, all bonds that are issued by municipalities have a call feature. And usually in today's market, that usually is a 10-year call provision. In other words, we're essentially saying to those from whom we're borrowing the money, we're not going to call these bonds for 10 years. If we were to say to them, hey, we would really like to be able to call these bonds in 5 years, the market would look at that somewhat negatively and they would charge us for that. So we would pay a higher rate to have a shorter call. One of the reasons why the call period is super important to us these days. Let's go back to the mortgage example for a moment. If you take out a mortgage and all of a sudden interest rates go down, you could call your financial institution and discuss with them refinancing that mortgage. And you do that to save money, both on a cash flow basis each year and also on a, total term of the mortgage, right? We'd like to do the same thing with bonds. As interest rates go down over time, we would like to be able to refund these bonds. Now, refund is the term that we use in the municipal finance world for refinancing those bonds to get a lower interest rate. And you can't do that really during the call period anymore. So we watch those very closely. Allegiant Stadium, we're probably 5 years away from the call date on those bonds, at which time we would be looking for opportunities to refinance those. So the call becomes very, very important. It's an assurance to the owner of the bond that these bonds won't be called, and I can rely on this tax exempt interest for at least that 10-year period. And for the other side, for the borrowing side, the municipal side, that tells us when we could look at opportunities to refinance the debt.
Okay.
Great question.
Yeah, I'm going to rush through some of these because first of all, Hopus says, how well are these? He says the full faith and credit of Nevada are presumably not backing the bonds. It's the county, right? Yeah. And
yes, it'll be a pledge by Clark County, and Clark County's rating is AA plus AA1, which is awfully.
And then Hopus asks how well received will they be in the market. I would think that with what happened with Allegiant, and you're dealing with Clark County, right? So that's.
Hey, I mean, really, for those of your listeners and followers that buy bonds, I think one of the things you look at right away is the credit rating on those bonds. And usually, if you see the words general obligation, you feel very, very secure about the form of repayment. So in essence, the form of repayment for these bonds is not only that revenue coming off of the Sports and Entertainment Improvement District, and I think I might have misspoken earlier when I referred to it as a special entertainment improvement district. It's so new, I'm still learning the name of our own thing here, but Sports and Entertainment Improvement District revenues will be pledged to pay off those bonds. And in the event that revenue is insufficient, the full faith and credit of the county is there to back it as well. And this is another feature of the legislation. 1/2 times annual coverage from the state of Nevada, which doesn't pledge the state's full faith and credit. It just provides some additional coverage or backing for the bonds. So they're very secure. And because they carry the name Clark County and because they also are general obligation, I think they'll be very well received by the market. It really has very little to do with what the project is, although in some cases, I think there are individuals that are maybe more enticed to buy a bond that has something to do with, say the Raiders or Allegiant Stadium or something like that. But it really has very little to do with the credit.
Yeah. Manchester, I'm going to skip yours because it's a land use question, but the answer is that the question is, in fairness, is a strip big enough when Lakers have a retractable roof? Well, you are putting together a stadium, but the roof is on top of it. So it's not so much a width issue. It's really height. And therefore, since we're talking about acreage, the answer is it's just fine. Then it says, when is the expected issue of the bonds? I think you said 12 to 18 months, right? So thereabouts. Okay, yeah. So now it gets to my question. My question is, first of all, when did you get involved with talking with the A's, Dave Cavall and the A's?
Well, I became aware of the potential for this project roughly 2 years ago. First conversation I had was with Dave Cavall, and I think it was in April of 21, and it was just a 50,000 foot type of call about the possibilities or potential that something like this may happen. Over the next several months, my role in this is somewhat limited because I'm primarily I represent Clark County as their municipal or financial advisor. And that's largely the same role I had with Allegiant Stadium, although that one was done a bit differently. The county was more of a presence at the table in working out the overall financial structure for Allegiant Stadium than it was for SB1 of this last session, which is related to the A's stadium. So as things moved toward the beginning of the state legislature this past February, I became very, very engaged in that entire process, and in particular, anything that might affect the county having to issue debt and the terms under which the county would be agreeable to issuing that debt. And that was a very, very complicated process.
Hmm.
Far more complicated than Allegiant Stadium, and far more complicated than most of the bond issuances that we work on here in the state.
Why?
Well, again, you're talking about creating a new type of taxing district, so that adds one layer of complication. You're talking about potential credit issues that are unlike pledging something that's known, like sales tax or property tax or motor vehicle fuel tax, things like that. So we had a lot of workarounds to do there. One of your listeners asked about taxable or tax exempt. That's something that we had to work through, and the conditions under which the bonds could be tax exempt, because that's highly preferable. Issues relating to coverage, issues relating to debt reserve. Now, all of these things that we're now talking about, coverage and debt reserves and things like that, are things that don't necessarily affect the sellability of the bonds. Again, you as a buyer of the bonds would look at it and say, hey, Clark County, AA rated, general obligation backed, I'm in. The next order of business is really as important, and that is protecting the security of the county and the state of Nevada. If something were to go wrong, and look, we all make projections, and we have some that come awfully close. We have some that are wildly different over time. Now, when you're looking at a 30-year period of repayment of bonds, you have to take into account everything that you think could happen over those 30 years. We know that there will probably be 2 or 3 recessionary periods over a 30-year period. Heck, Zenny, if you would have asked me 5 years ago, one of the things that I wouldn't have listed was a pandemic,
Right.
and the effects that can have on an economy. So there are things that you could think about that could cause variations in revenues over time that could affect the ability to repay debt. It's usually the things you could never think of that are the ones that happen over a 30-year period, right? And so all of that combined, tells me as the advisor to the county that we have to be extremely conservative and provide every protective measure possible for any variation that could occur over a 30-year period. Now, that becomes complicated because, and these are terms that I know I've spoken with you about in the past, but we require 2 times coverage, which means that you have to have twice as much revenue projected each year as debt service payable each year. And that's to accommodate for those variances in the performance of revenue over time. And we're also requiring a 2-year reserve, the first of which will be funded as a part of the issuance of the bonds. The second will be funded out of cash flow. One is for variance of the estimates over time, and the other one is for liquidity. Because sometimes when the debt payments are due, they're due on particular days. The cash is accruing, and if the cash doesn't match the amount that's due on that particular day, the last thing in the world you want is a technical default. That doesn't speak well of the credit, right? So you maintain reserves to provide the liquidity to be able to get past that. And as you, I know, are aware, in the early years following the issuance of bonds for Allegiant Stadium, we had to, and fortunately we had them, we had to use some of the reserves that we had set aside because of COVID and the impact that it had on room tax.
Mm-hmm.
We're fortunately back to a point where we're almost at the pre-COVID levels in terms of the reserves. We've recaptured all of that.
Congratulations.
But everything I described to you is, the type of thing that causes sleepless nights for people in public finance, and that is making sure that you've created enough security that there will never be a default on the bonds that your name is associated with.
What was it like working with the A's versus the Raiders and everybody else?
You mean from an interpersonal perspective, or?
Take it as you wish. Yeah, open
Oh,
ended.
okay. Well, again, it was a little bit different because the county's role with the A's was a bit different than it was with Allegiant Stadium. With Allegiant Stadium, the county was in the room as early as any of the parties were in the room. Obviously, the stake for the county with Allegiant Stadium was more than twice what it is with the A's, and consequently, and it's the first of these types of things that we had been involved with directly. We were very good at issuing debt and very good at doing it in a very conservative way, very good at maintaining the high credit quality of the county. But something like a stadium was a bit of a new venture, even here in Las Vegas. This last time around, the A's and the state, I think, worked more closely together. The county was a bit of a late entry into that process, but nonetheless, we still accomplished everything from the county's perspective that we needed to protect the credit of the county and hopefully the state as well. So it's just a little bit different. I think we had a bit more, reflecting back on it, Zenny, I think we had a bit more lead time with Allegiant Stadium to work into the special legislative session and then work into the drafting of all of the various agreements. Here we had a much more compressed timeline because of the legislative session. So they were similar in some ways, but different in a lot of ways.
I'm also going to take this question because there are a lot of people who, among A's fans, are pushing for the sale of the team. And I keep saying that, well, why would Mr. Fisher want to sell the team when he's going to where it's going to increase the franchise value by a factor of 3? Now, but as I think about it, the A's aren't even in a position to entertain that because they have a, if not a written contract, then an implied contract with you all regarding the bond issue. Am I wrong or right?
Well, as a part of all of this, and I don't want to get too far outside of my lane. I mean, I'm
Sure.
given work I've done over the years, I'm not unfamiliar with how professional sports franchises operate. So I do feel comfortable, somewhat comfortable in that area. But obviously, all owners of professional sports teams operate a bit differently, and that isn't to say one is better than the other, but they do operate differently, and leagues operate differently as well. I mean, Major League Baseball does things differently than the NFL, does things differently than the NHL. So you have all of those different factors to play into it. But one of the agreements that will be prerequisite to the issuance of the use of any of the public funds will be a non-relocation agreement, number one. The Raiders also had to enter into that. And the importance of having that in place, I think, is pretty self-evident. We're not going to commit any public funds without knowing that there is a non-relocation agreement in place and recourse in the event that relocation does occur, right? Because we're taking a financial risk that's compatible with the risk that's being taken by the private venture. And so we want to make sure we have that in place. Now, whether or not the Raiders or the A's or any other team out there that's not in Las Vegas, maybe the Stanley Cup champion Las Vegas Golden Knights.
Congratulations.
We might as well raise that as well because
Yeah,
that's one of the greatest stories in sports, right?
I agree. Yeah.
If any of those franchises choose to sell, they're really dealing with the rules that each of the leagues have with respect to transfer of ownership and approval of new ownership. That's something that's outside of the public public process here. There was some talk during the course of the legislative session about including things like what was it referred to as a flip fee. That was not something that was a part of the legislation at the end, and it's something that I'm sure Major League Baseball would have had some issues with, and the other owners might have had some issues with, setting a precedent where if the team is sold, there's some kind of financial compensation owed the municipality or the locality within which the team has resided. That's an issue separate and apart from securing bonds. But I believe that with the people that we had involved from the Nevada side, many of which you're familiar with because they're a lot of the same people that were involved with the Raiders transaction. I don't believe there were a lot of stones that were left unturned, as a part of the process in trying to determine how to make this a positive thing for not only the community and an enhancement to tourism here in the community, but also very safe for the taxpayers. I mean, that's of primary importance to me as well.
I promised a hard stop at 5:45. I'm 3 minutes over, but I could talk, and we talked for a long time. This man is a true legend, and again, I want to thank you for coming on to the show, and I want to, encourage you to come back because you've seen a lot of the development of Las Vegas, arguably been a part of it. I haven't even had a chance to talk to you about how the SNTIC came about, what Las Vegas has done. I'm a personal fan of, as you know. I call Las Vegas Epcot, the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. And my friend, you're really a part of that. So again, I can't thank you enough for coming on, and God bless you. Okay.
It's always an absolute pleasure to talk to you, Zenny. I really admire what you do up there, and I'm glad there are people as passionate as you out there.
Thank you, folks. He's got a hard stop. We're going to close it. Guy, you don't have to do anything. I'll take care of it. Folks, subscribe to Zenny62 on YouTube and bookmark OaklandNewsNowBlog.com and Zenny62.com. That ends this broadcast with a push of a button.